Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on how you can benefit from the big changes to property planning laws in Victoria. Welcome, Robbie McDowell from GSA and Builtfast Homes.
Thanks, Christian. Always a pleasure and a joy to catch up. And it's such an important time in property because these changes are massive, probably the biggest we've seen in our lifetime. And all with the goal of trying to make it easier and cut the red tape for property owners and investors. So it's a pretty good time for investors. In fact, there's a fast track process that promises to give you a permit in 10 days, which is pretty quick.
Yeah, that's unheard of. That's huge.
Yeah. And so they made a lot of these changes have just gone through in September as well, and another raft of updates. So we're really decoding what it all means for investors and for property owners. They've had a look at particularly townhouse and low-rise through up to 3-story apartments. They're really trying to hone in and encourage that type of development. And in fact, the 10-day permit applies to those types of projects, which is pretty exciting for your average person who wants to do a dual lock or wants to do a small apartment block or something like that. Also to note is the changes around activity zones. The state government's taking more and more control of those zones and making provision for, rising the levels in there. My home in Northcote is all of a sudden got a 5-story provision. It's a little tree-lined street, little row houses. All of a sudden you can build up to 5 stories.
Yeah, wow. So what do you think the government's trying to achieve with the changes?
Yeah, the government's really focusing in on their housing targets. In fact, they've set targets for local councils as well. So they're really pushing, because we've got this high immigration environment, they're really pushing how can we get more houses on the ground, and particularly these infill sites where there's already existing infrastructure. So you can come into those areas, there's a dual lock, and you've got all the services there. So they're really encouraging those types of developments. Builders, we're seeing recent stats are saying builders are not necessarily picking up the speed that the government wants. Building approvals were down 6.6% last month. So, builders are a bit nervous at the moment. Some of the sites are not stacking up in terms of return. I spoke to a builder last week. He did 2 houses in the Whitehorse area and made a 0 profit. So, whether they'll, just through changing the planning process, get the housing stock they need is a big question mark. And probably for investors, that signals an upward trend in property prices because that supply and demand, that we're just not providing enough supply at the moment.
Yeah, understood. So what are the most significant changes property owners need to be aware of, do you think?
Well, I think this fast track, this 10-day kind of process, which is the most exciting because it gives people some confidence. There's some issues around it. There's some complexity, of course, but it gives a pathway for people to really get a known outcome within that 10-day period, which is exciting. Councils can muck around with permits forever, or kick them around, say, oh, you didn't provide this and that, So this will really put the heat on the councils in a lot of ways.
Yep, definitely. I know in my area, like the applications are usually valid for 90 days if it's a pre-approval, so for someone planning 12 months out, things can change. So 10 days is a fast process. Is there a catch?
There's always a catch. Most of it is around, I would say, landscaping and tree canopy. But just in breaking it down a bit, this townhouse low-rise development sort of pathway is giving people the opportunity to submit plans based on the building requirements And if that complies, if that is within those requirements, then it's called deemed to comply. And that's where the 10-day comes in. That's why it's possible, because if it's deemed to comply and the council look at it and go, yeah, it complies, then they can issue the permit within that 10-day period. The faster permits, it aims for like single homes. So single homes certainly can apply in that 10-day fast track process, which is great. And there'll be no need to advertise, or there can't be objections. That 10 days is set. Once it's approved, there's no objections, no advertising for those blocks. And similarly with townhouse projects, again, if it complies with all the rules, then it's deemed to apply, and the property owner can receive that permit within potentially 10 days.
So, Robbie, some investors waking up to a new increased value in property?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, particularly around those activity centres. I mean, we won't see that for a little while, because people have actually got to wake up and understand that things have changed overnight, and that takes time. And particularly some areas you're not going to see development. You know, in my street, you'd have to buy 4 blocks to try and get an apartment block. So what is the value of that acquisition versus the end product? Does that stack? Probably not at the moment, unless you get the right price. So, yeah, there is definitely people who are going to benefit from this, depending on their position in those activity centres, particularly because they're now getting a 5-story, whereas before maybe it was 3-story or something like that. So there's extra potential value in that increase. So yeah, there's a lot to think about. I think that the speed of getting your dual occupancy done, again, is worth value. So particularly, and a subdivision is again a fast track item in the Vic government planning regulation now. So there's a couple of areas where that's going to improve value in particular circumstances.
Yeah, so worth checking in about your property then.
Yeah, definitely. And we're doing that for a lot of clients. There's complexity there, so they'll come and have a chat to us. They're looking at a project. We certainly love helping people out in property because it's, you don't like seeing people make mistakes and getting into binds that they don't need to get into. So there's certainly value in terms of what we do with our clients and how we help them in that way. But other things that the process sets out is that there's limited third-party appeals. That's a really important thing. So that's what fast tracks it, that whole process of advertising, receiving objections, ending up in VCAT. For a lot of people, that ends today. So that's a pretty exciting sort of process. And as I said before, you no longer need a permit for a single dwelling. So you want to build your house, as long as it complies with the regulation, then you're free. Within 10 days, you're free to start building or start your process. So, and the townhouse process, particularly dual locks, is a big change. So you've got to be able to get your dual lock through in that 10-day process. The only things that you may hit are around landscaping and canopy trees. So some of those changes are very significant. The government's trying to provide for a 30% canopy. It's all this like shade, keeping things cool, keeping it cool. So in that sense, there's things that could be a snag, in terms of the trees. If you've got to remove a tree, a large canopy tree, then you've got to go back through the permit process, which, as we know, is the long way around rather than accessing this fast track sort of process. There's particularly things changing around a 2-lot subdivision in residential zones. So you're going to be able to get those types of permits through under the 10 days, as long as you're not impacting the landscape or don't have provision of changes to the landscape. Then you're going to be able to run through those 10 days, the 10-day process.
Yeah, fantastic. So, yes, there seems to be a comprehensive shift in paradigm. 10 days if your plan complies, no objections, should speed up planning. Are there any other snags you think people could face in the process?
There's a lot of things are advantageous. So even the provision for private garden space, there used to be higher percentages around what you need to provide for a new dwelling or a townhouse. So they've reduced those. They've reduced the overshadowing requirements, although interestingly, they've now protected solar panels from overshadowing, which I think is could be an absolute bit of a nightmare. But we'll see how that plays out. Overlooking, again, the overlooking standard no longer applies to bedrooms. So, there's a lot of things that are shifted in the favour of the property owner and the builder developer. That's for sure.
Fantastic. So some pretty big changes in planning law, probably the biggest we've seen in the last 20 years. Thank you for the comprehensive talk on the topic. Such key considerations for property owners and investors alike, really.
Yeah, it's a big change, and some people will take advantage of it. Some people will get the knowledge, get the understanding. It's all about knowledge, isn't it, Christian, in terms of getting the results. And in that sense, we're certainly out there to help people. I know you've got that spirit of helping people. So talk to us if you have any issues around this topic, and particularly we know Christian is a gun at the finance side of things. So certainly reach out to him if you're planning a project and want to see what finance you get. I often talk to people about the strategic nature of finance, finding out before you get into a situation. It's so important, isn't it, Christian?
It is. It's definitely a factor, especially with the costs and, how long you're going to hold things and all of that. There's so much strategy that goes behind it. And I'm one piece of the puzzle. You're another one. And, it all comes together.
Yeah, for sure. And we're looking to do another session because what's coming up, what's latest sort of news coming up, is this a couple of banks sort of talking about not funding trusts in terms of finance options. That's big news, isn't it?
Huge news, and I feel like it's just starting. So let's see how it all plays out. I think by the time we catch up, we'll probably have some more items to discuss on top of what's already happening.
Yeah. So look forward to that and getting that information once it's available, because I'm sure there's always options and there's always ways to strategize these things as they come up as challenges.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's just about having the right people on your side.
That's right. Well, lovely to chat. And as we said, reach out if you need any support and advice. And we look forward to seeing you on the next session.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Over and out.